Grace Place groups. I just saw some statistics today that said we have about 43 adult groups right now, plus 10 student groups. So over 50 small groups meeting this week. That's incredible. I'm excited about all those people. The average group is around 10, so if you have a larger group than that, some are smaller. And so there's hundreds of people who are getting together and studying the Bible this week, and that is a good thing. I'm glad you're one of them. As we've been starting a new series now, looking at the last book of the Bible, Revelation, it's so important in our Bible study, personally and in group settings, that we use the Bible responsibly. I often talk about this book to people. It's called How to Read the Bible for All It's Worth, and it's by Gordon Fee and Douglas Stewart. I think the first chapter is worth the price of the book. It goes on in the other chapters to talk about different genres of literature in the Bible, whether it be poetry or epistles or history, and how the Psalms, how each of these different genres have to be approached a little bit differently to use the Bible responsibly. But the first chapter is about the need to interpret. Sometimes people say to me, I just read the Bible and just go with whatever it says. Well, it's not enough, because that's how you come up with hundreds of different conclusions, and some of them not accurate. The Bible has to be not only read, but interpreted. So that means we need to do careful work with the text. Scholars like to use big words like exegesis and hermeneutics. That might not be a part of your everyday vocabulary, but exegesis just means to go back carefully and look at what the text said for its original recipients. And we do that by trying to understand both the context and the content. The context being the historical setting. And sometimes we can understand it better than other times, but there are tools to help us. Bible dictionaries, commentaries, and so on. And we can kind of try to get back into the sandals of those original folks that first heard the message and hear it the way they heard it first before we jump to our time. Our temptation is to just grab something from the Bible that will help us. And so many times we'll just grab a verse here or grab a verse there and try to immediately apply it to our lives. And the problem with that is we may be making the Bible say something it was never intended to say. And so first we want to do proper exegesis. Otherwise we're doing eisegesis, which means we're just yanking it out of context. We want to do proper exegesis, which means we go back and we try to look at the context and the content. What was it actually, what did the Bible say? Before we talk about what it means, let's be careful to see what it says. And then the next step is, what does it mean originally and today? And that's where we move to hermeneutics. That's applying it to our current situation now that we're doing it responsibly because we understand how it was originally received. Well, that's what we want to do with Revelation and every book of the Bible that we study, but this one particularly so because it's so unique. And I would encourage you to just read again the introduction that we looked at last week, the first 3 verses, and then read all the way through to the end of the introduction in verse 8. So read the first 8 verses. And as you read these, and before you discuss these, keep in mind the original setting. Imagine yourself being a Christian in the first century in a home with the door locked, with a little bit of apprehension, because if the authorities knock on the door, you're having this secret meeting that's not allowed, and you've got this scroll that's being read that is not allowed, and so there's a lot of anticipation to understand what's here, but also some apprehension about what could happen. And imagine how for example, the descriptions of God and Jesus, the titles, imagine how they would have been perceived by those first century believers who were being persecuted, who had the threat of imprisonment, torture, and death hanging over them because of their faith in Jesus. And so they hear, for example, in verse 4, that God is the one who was and who is to come, who is and who was and who is to come. Think about how they would have taken that title. before you start thinking about how it applies to you, which we need to do in Bible study also. Think about how they would have perceived Jesus as, in verse 5, a faithful witness, which is over in chapter 2, verse 10, applied to a guy who's already been martyred for his faith. Jesus died for his faith. He is a faithful witness. And he died not just for his faith, but for us and for our faith. How would they have taken the idea that Jesus was the firstborn from the dead? That no matter what happens to us, we're all going to die, but none of us want to die prematurely. But if we do, we can be confident that because Jesus came forth from the grave, so can we. How would have they taken the title ruler of the kings of the earth? Because they think Caesar is in control, and he has all these puppet kings around the Roman Empire that obey him, but there is one who is over all. He's the ruler of the king of the earth. And then the Alpha and Omega in verse 8, the beginning and the end, that's Greek letters for the first letter, Alpha, the last letter of the alphabet, Omega. And it includes all that goes between as well. And then at the very end of verse 8, God is called the Almighty. That's a frequent term for God in the Old Testament, but not in the New Testament. For some reason, it's not picked up much. In fact, it's only used 10 times in the New Testament, and 9 of those references are in Revelation. I don't think it's a surprise that the term that's frequently used here for God is Almighty, because it seemed that the enemies at that time of God and of the church and of the people of God were mighty. But God is Almighty. So as you go through here and you put yourself back into the context, then it's very helpful to also apply it to your life. What kind of storms are you going through right now? What kind of challenges are you facing? The more you're willing to share that with others in the group, the more personal these groups get and the more bonded we get in our small groups. But I hope that you will also find courage in your storm with these different titles and the reality behind them and the hope that we can have when we put our hope in Christ alone. My hope is built on nothing less than Jesus Christ and his righteousness. And that's the solid rock we want to stand on, because all other ground is sinking sand. Little lingo there from a hymn that is full of rich theology. Have a great discussion, you guys, and be sure that you pray for each other about your prayer requests as well.